They thought I'd spend Thanksgiving sweating over a stove, 30 relatives, 3 turkeys, endless side dishes, all prepared by me, alone. What they didn't know? By the time the first guest walked through the door, I was already 30,000 feet, above the ground. See, my parents always believed family traditions meant sacrifice. But what they really meant was my sacrifice. I was supposed to smile, serve, and keep the food coming while everyone else laughed in the living room. The more invisible I became, the more comfortable they were. And for years, I played along. Until that one Thanksgiving, the one where everything broke open. But before we get to the airport gate, let's rewind. My name's Claire, middle child, lifelong people-pleaser, and apparently the unofficial family caterer. If there was a wedding, I was the one arranging the flowers. If there was a graduation, I was the one making sure the cake was cut evenly. And on Thanksgiving, I was the one who started chopping onions while everyone else complained about traffic. It didn't matter that I worked a full-time job. It didn't matter that my apartment was barely holding together, or that my own friends begged me to spend the holidays with them instead. Somehow, my life kept orbiting around everyone else's expectations. That Thanksgiving was no different. At least, at first. My mother handed me a handwritten list the size of a grocery store receipt. Turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, pies. Oh, and make sure Uncle Rick gets his low-sodium option. My father? He just chuckled, as if my exhaustion was part of the entertainment. I looked around the kitchen, 30 mouths to feed, one me. The math never added up. But here's the twist. This wasn't a story about food. It was a story about value. Because cooking Thanksgiving wasn't just about a meal. It was about control. It was about reminding me that no matter how old I got, or how far I went, my role in the family was service. Except, not anymore. That morning, when everyone was busy setting the table, I quietly rolled my suitcase into the trunk of my car. While my cousins argued over football and my mom yelled about cranberry sauce, I was on the freeway headed straight to the airport. My phone buzzed nonstop, but I didn't answer. By the time they realized I wasn't basting turkeys, my boarding pass had already been scanned, and that's where this story really begins. The day my family expected a servant and got an empty kitchen instead. So how does someone go from being the overlooked middle child to making the boldest Thanksgiving escape in family history? What does it take to stop being the invisible cook and start being seen as a person? That's the journey you're about to hear. And trust me, it's messier, funnier, and more emotional than any Thanksgiving dinner you've ever been to. So buckle up, story lovers. Welcome to my story. From Where Are You Watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. I wasn't born with a spatula in my hand, though sometimes it felt like it. My earliest memories weren't of playground swings or birthday balloons. They were of standing on a chair in my mother's kitchen, peeling potatoes while she barked instructions. Not too thick, Claire. Don't waste food. I was 8 years old. 8, and already carrying the weight of being the responsible one. See, in our family, every child had a role. My older brother, Daniel, was the golden boy. Star athlete, straight A student, the one who never had to lift a finger at home. My younger sister, Emily, was the delicate flower, too fragile to be asked to do anything strenuous. That left me, the middle child, the glue, the worker bee, the invisible caretaker. I didn't complain, at least not out loud. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe someone would notice me. Maybe my mother would pause long enough to say, "Thank you, Claire." But gratitude was a foreign language in our household. Silence was the closest thing to approval. The dreams. Nobody saw. Despite the endless chores, I had my own dreams, big ones. When I was 12, I fell in love with writing. Not just scribbling diary entries, but full stories. My English teacher once wrote on an essay, "You have a gift for capturing emotions that don't have words. For the first time, I felt seen. I wanted to be a journalist, one of those writers whose words could change minds, expose truths, and make people care. But at home? That dream was laughed out of the room. Journalism? That's not a real job, my father said, barely looking up from his newspaper. Better learn how to cook. At least that'll keep you fed. And so, like steam from a pot, my dreams drifted into the air, still present but invisible. Early Sacrifices High School was supposed to be a time of pep rallies and prom dresses, but mine was filled with late nights at the diner. At 16, I was working after school just to afford my own clothes. My paycheck didn't go to movie tickets or makeup. It went to groceries, because the family budget is tight, Claire, and you're old enough to help. Sometimes I'd sneak upstairs with a notebook, writing stories under the covers by flashlight. But exhaustion always won. My grades slipped. My teachers stopped pushing me. And slowly, my dreams sank lower on the list of priorities, buried under. Bills and obligations? College? That word became a joke in our household. When Daniel got into a university out of state, my parents emptied half their savings to support him. When Emily wanted art lessons, they found the money somehow. But when I brought home brochures for journalism programs, the answer was quick. We can't afford that, Claire. Be realistic. Realistic meant community college. Realistic meant commuting on buses while working 2 jobs. Realistic meant shelving my writing to take business classes I hated, because at least you'll get a job out of it. But even realistic didn't last. The breaking point, the moment everything fell apart, wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A Tuesday afternoon, sophomore year of community college. I was sitting in a crowded lecture hall, my notebook filled, with doodles instead of notes. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Don't forget, grocery shopping today. We need you to make dinner. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't living a life. I was filling a role. Within a month, I dropped out. Not because I wasn't capable, but because survival seemed more urgent than education. I took a full-time job as a receptionist at a small insurance office. It wasn't glamorous. My desk was wedged between a filing cabinet and the break room door. But it paid the bills. It allowed me to contribute to the household. And in my family, that was all that mattered. The invisible years from 20 to 28, my life was a blur of obligations. Birthdays, weddings, funerals. I was the one setting up chairs, baking cakes, organizing rides. Nobody asked if I wanted to. They just assumed. There were small betrayals along the way. The time Emily borrowed my savings, just until next month, and never paid me back. The time my mom gifted Daniel a car for graduation while I was still taking buses in the rain. The time I overheard my father telling a neighbor, "Claire, she's dependable, not ambitious." That one stung. Not ambitious. No one saw the ambition still flickering in me, the small spark that refused to go out. I still read articles late at night, studied journalists I admired, and scribbled lines of prose on scrap paper, but those pages never left my desk drawer. Survival mode. Then came the financial collapse. My father lost his job during a company downsizing. Overnight, our household income halved. Bills piled up. Tension thickened. And as always, the responsibility trickled down to me. Picked up a second job at a bakery, waking at 4 a.m. to frost cakes before heading to the insurance office. My hands were raw, my body exhausted. But somehow we made it through. Not because of family effort, but because of me. The cruelest part? No one acknowledged it. Thanksgiving rolled around that year, and while I was making stuffing with blistered hands, Daniel walked in wearing a new watch. "Got a bonus at work," he bragged. Everyone clapped. No one asked how I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep. But survival has its own kind of pride. I knew deep down that I was stronger than any of them realized. They mistook my silence for weakness. but silence was the only shield I had left. The quiet resilience. In those years, I learned how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I learned how to swallow my own dreams without choking. I learned how to put on a smile at family gatherings even when my heart felt like an empty room. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if this was all life had to offer: servitude, invisibility, exhaustion. But there were also nights when I found slivers of hope. A kind word from a stranger at the bakery. A customer who told me I had a warm presence. A stolen hour spent writing in a coffee shop, pretending for just a moment that I was the person I once dreamed of becoming. Those moments didn't erase the struggles, but they kept me alive. And that's the thing about buried dreams. They don't die. They wait, quietly, patiently, until the day you're brave enough to dig them up again. By the time that infamous Thanksgiving rolled around, I was nearly 30. A decade of sacrifice behind me. A decade of being the family's invisible backbone. And though I didn't know it yet, the years of silence had been building toward something bigger, because buried pain has a way of resurfacing. And survival, as exhausting as it is, plants the seed for transformation. The stage was set. I just hadn't realized the curtain was about to rise. For years, I told myself this was just how life worked. You sacrifice, you serve, and maybe, just maybe, you get a crumb of appreciation. But cracks were beginning to show in the walls I had built around myself. And like sunlight slipping through blinds, hope began sneaking in when I least expected it. The spark had started at the insurance office, not with a promotion or a raise. Those things never came my way. But with a small accident. One of the managers left a stack of reports on the copier. As I gathered them up, a page caught my eye. Not the numbers, but the language. Quarterly. Summary adjusted to maintain favorable narrative. Something about that phrasing stuck in my throat. I wasn't an auditor, but I had enough sense to know that adjusted and narrative didn't belong in the same sentence. Curiosity got the better of me. I stayed late that night, pretending to finish filing. When the office emptied, I flipped through the pages again. And there it was. Numbers that didn't add up, totals that seemed polished to perfection, discrepancies that whispered cover-up. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't an accountant. I wasn't important enough for anyone to take seriously. But I felt something stir in me, a sharpness I hadn't felt since my teenage years scribbling stories under a flashlight. For the first time in years, my mind felt alive, hungry. The characters enter. Michael. He was a junior analyst, quiet but observant, the kind of coworker who noticed when you looked tired and brought you coffee without saying much. He also had a sharp eye for detail. When I casually asked him about the reports, his reaction told me I wasn't imagining things. Yeah, he muttered, lowering his voice. You ever feel like we're working at a magic show? Numbers disappear, reappear, nobody asks why. That was the first time I felt I wasn't alone. Someone else saw it. Someone else understood. But not everyone was a friend. There was also Denise, a supervisor who thrived on making me feel small. She had a way of turning my reliability into a weapon. Claire, you're so dependable. Can you stay late again? Claire, you don't mind covering this, right? You're used to it. And if she ever caught wind of me poking around, it would be over. A memory reignited. That night, after everyone had left, I sat at my desk with the report spread out in front of me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. This, digging into details, searching for truth, this was what I had always wanted. Not insurance, not customer service, journalism, investigation. The memory stung. All those years of being told, be realistic. And here I was, doing the very thing I was told I could never do. I started small. I began journaling again. Not about my feelings this time, but about the numbers, the oddities, the things nobody else seemed to notice. It felt dangerous. It felt exhilarating. The risk. But here's the problem with sparks. They can light fires, and fires attract attention. I wasn't sure who I could trust. Michael was supportive, but cautious. Denise seemed to sniff around my desk more than usual, as if she could smell rebellion. And at home? Forget it. If I even hinted at wanting more. From life, my family would shut it down. "Claire, you have a stable job," my mom always said. "Why rock the boat?" Stable. That word felt like a chain. Stable meant stuck. Stable meant invisible. Stable meant forever the one holding the turkey baster while everyone else lived their lives. But deep inside, I knew. Stability was just another word for cage, the rising conflict. The tension grew sharper by the week. Every time I uncovered another inconsistency in the reports, I felt both empowered and terrified. What if I spoke up? What if I exposed it? What if I actually mattered? And then, just like life loves to do, it all collided with family obligations. Thanksgiving was approaching. 30 people. One cook. Me. As my family piled more and more responsibilities onto my shoulders, I felt the walls closing in. During the day, I was juggling numbers and secrets at the office. At night, I was scrubbing pans and making grocery lists that stretched longer than my paycheck. I was burning out. Again. But here's where the conflict truly sharpened. I realized that I couldn't live in both worlds anymore. I couldn't be both the silent servant at home and the quiet investigator at work. One version of me had to die for the other to live. The decision. I remember sitting in my car one night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't just tears of exhaustion. They were tears of defiance. I thought, what if I stopped saying yes? What if I stopped being invisible? What if just once I chose me? The thought was terrifying. Choosing myself felt like betrayal. My family needed me. My office depended on me. But wasn't I allowed to depend on myself? That night, I made a silent decision. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew this much. The next time my family tried to bury me under duty, I wouldn't stay buried. And that decision, quiet, trembling, terrifying, was the first true act of rebellion in my life. Foreshadowing the storm, I didn't know then that Thanksgiving would become my battleground. I didn't know that a simple holiday would become the day I reclaimed my life. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted. The same girl who once scribbled stories under flashlight had finally stood up inside me again, and once you wake her up, you can't put her back to sleep. Thanksgiving morning smelled like butter and onions, the scent of my exhaustion. By 9 a.m., I had already peeled potatoes, set pies to cool, and basted 2 turkeys. Sweat dripped down my back as laughter echoed from the living room, where the men debated football stats and the women traded gossip. Me? I was invisible again, the servant in my own story. But this year, I wasn't just chopping vegetables. I was carrying a secret, thick stacks of evidence from my office tucked away in my laptop bag, pages that revealed millions of dollars shuffled around like cards in a magic trick. Numbers doctored, reports falsified, and lives impacted while executives smiled in their glass offices. And I, the receptionist, the invisible worker, had uncovered it. The boiling point by noon, the kitchen was a war zone. My mother hovered behind, me barking instructions. "Claire, don't forget the gravy. Claire, you're cutting those too thin. Claire, hurry! The guests are starving!" Guests, 30 mouths waiting for food. 30 people who never once offered to stir a pot or mash a potato, and as I glanced at the clock, something snapped. I saw my 20s flash before me. The jobs I hated, the dreams I buried, the sacrifices no one noticed. And here I was, nearly 30, still chained to an apron while everyone else lived. "Claire!" my mother snapped, as if sensing my hesitation. Stop standing around, get moving. But I didn't. For the first time, I didn't. Instead, I reached for my bag. The confrontation. When the family gathered around the dining table, plates clattered, glasses clinked, and the chatter rose to a roar. My father raised his glass. "To family traditions," he said proudly. "Another Thanksgiving, thanks to Claire's hard work." Applause, laughter, smiles. But I didn't smile. I set the carving knife down and walked into the center of the room. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "You call it tradition. I call it servitude." Silence fell. Forks froze mid-air. "What are you talking about?" My sister Emily scoffed. "I'm talking about this." I gestured to the overflowing table, the mountains of food, the 30 satisfied faces. "Year after year, I kill myself to make this happen. Not because I want to, but because none of you will lift a finger." Gasps. My mother's cheeks flushed. "Claire, that's enough." "No," I cut her off. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "It's not enough. It's never enough for you. You take and take, and the moment I ask for recognition, you call me dramatic." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you making a scene?" "Because it was a scene, the biggest of my life, the evidence." Then came the second blow. I pulled the folder from my bag, thick with the reports I had copied. "You think I'm just your cook, your maid, your safety net? You're wrong. I've seen things, real things, that actually matter. Fraud, lies, millions of dollars disappearing under the noses of people who pretend they're in control." Their jaws dropped. Some laughed nervously. My uncle muttered, "What's she talking about?" I laid the papers on the table. "This isn't about turkey. This isn't about mashed potatoes. This is about me refusing to be invisible anymore. About proving I'm worth more than peeling potatoes while the world burns." Michael's words echoed in my head. Numbers disappear, reappear. Nobody asks why. But I had asked why. And I had found the answers. The breaking point. My mother's voice trembled. "Claire, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said firmly. "I'm embarrassing you. For once, you don't get to silence me." My father barked, "Don't ruin Thanksgiving with your nonsense." But it wasn't nonsense. It was truth. I pulled out my phone and held it up. These documents, already emailed, to the IRS, to regulators, to a journalist who still believes in truth. By tomorrow morning, those executives will be answering questions they can't cook their way out of. The room went dead silent. I looked around the table at 30 stunned faces and felt something I had never felt before. Power, the release. I didn't wait for their approval. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't even wait for dessert. I walked to the door, grabbed my suitcase, and turned back just once. "This meal? It's the last one I'll ever cook for you. Next Thanksgiving, you'll have to find someone else to exploit." And with that, I left. By the time they realized I wasn't bluffing, I was already at the airport gate, boarding pass in hand. The hum of the terminal was music to me, sweeter than any applause. That was the day everything shifted. The day I stopped being the invisible. Cook and became the woman who walked out, with evidence, with courage, with dignity. The day I boarded a plane, not to run away, but to finally run toward myself. Ruth didn't stay. When the dust settled and the company's lawyers came crawling, with contracts, offers, and golden promises, she smiled politely and shook her head. She had scrubbed their floors, wiped their coffee stains, and polished their boardroom tables for years. Now they wanted her as a senior advisor, parading her around as proof of their progressive values. But Ruth wasn't a trophy. She was a woman who had carried broken dreams in silence, who had raised a child on dimes and hope, who had discovered her worth in the quiet hours after midnight with nothing but a phone screen and a spreadsheet. She didn't need their validation. Instead, she chose freedom. The whistleblower settlement was generous, enough to pay off every debt, send her son to college without fear of tuition bills, and carve out a cushion of safety she had never known before. But Ruth knew money alone wasn't redemption. Redemption was about reclaiming control. It was about rewriting the story she had been forced into. So she sat down at her kitchen table, the same one where she once balanced unpaid bills, the same one where she taught her son long division on the back of grocery receipts, and she sketched a new plan. Not a survival plan, a legacy plan. Building something new. Ruth launched a forensic consulting firm, small at first, just her and an old laptop. She rented a modest office above a laundromat and kept her logo simple. Carter Integrity Solutions. No marble floors, no expensive chairs, just truth, numbers, and a mission. Her first clients weren't Fortune 500 companies. They were small, nonprofits, struggling local businesses, and women-owned startups terrified of making one accounting mistake that could destroy them. Ruth charged fairly, often less than market rate, and sometimes worked for free. She remembered what it was like to choose between groceries and gas money. She remembered being invisible. Word spread fast. Ruth wasn't just good at numbers. She was relentless. She saw patterns others missed, uncovered fraud others overlooked, and explained complicated systems in plain language that even the most nervous business owner could understand. Her firm grew. One assistant became 3. 3 became 10. Soon, corporations that once ignored her were calling her, begging for her expertise. The irony wasn't lost on Ruth. The same kind of boardrooms where she had once been dismissed as the cleaning. Lady now introduced her as the woman who saved us. But Ruth wasn't dazzled. She hadn't built her firm for them. She built it for women like her, for the single mother in worn shoes, the immigrant working 3 jobs, the young student, who thought her dreams had expired because life got hard too soon. So she started a mentorship program. Free workshops in community centers. Scholarships for low-income girls who wanted to study accounting, finance, or business. Guest lectures at high schools where she told her story, not the sanitized version, but the raw one. She told them about cleaning toilets with blistered hands, about nights she cried into expired ramen noodles, about the sting of being underestimated, and then she told them how it turned. How numbers, integrity, and a little courage had given her the keys to unlock doors she never thought she'd walk through. Her son's pride. Her son, Daniel, watched it all unfold. He had been the quiet witness to her hardest days, the nights she came home exhausted, the mornings she left before sunrise, the bills she shuffled in silence. Now he was watching something new, his mother stepping fully into the woman she was always meant to be. Daniel excelled in school, fueled by her example. He wasn't just proud, he was inspired. He often told his friends, "My mom doesn't just fight for me, she fights for everyone." When he graduated high school at the top of his class, Ruth sat in the front row, tears slipping down her cheeks as he delivered his valedictorian speech. His words weren't about himself, they were about her. "She taught me," he said, "that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like staying up all night to balance books no one else believes you can balance. Sometimes it looks like walking into a room where no one sees you and leaving that room as the person no one can ignore." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Ruth wept openly. For years she had fought just to give him a chance. Now, he was holding the mic, speaking a truth she had never dared say out loud. Ruth's quiet victory. Ruth's redemption wasn't flashy. She didn't buy a mansion. She didn't post photos of luxury cars. She still lived in the same modest neighborhood, still planted flowers in her small front yard, still waved at the mailman every morning. But the difference was in her peace. She no longer woke up with a knot in her stomach, wondering which bill collector would call. She no longer felt invisible walking into crowded rooms. She no longer doubted her worth. When she traveled now, for work, for speaking events, or just for joy, she boarded planes without fear. She remembered the first time she chose herself. When she walked away from that impossible Thanksgiving, her family tried to pile on her shoulders. That moment wasn't rebellion. It was rebirth. Every plane she boarded afterward felt like a continuation of that choice, the choice to rise. Full circle years later, Ruth was invited back to the very company where it all began, not as an employee, but as the keynote speaker for their annual ethics conference. She stood on the same stage where she had once been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. But now, the room leaned forward, hanging on her every word. She didn't speak with bitterness. She spoke with clarity, grace, and a quiet strength. Integrity, she told them, isn't about numbers on a page. It's about the people those numbers affect. I was once your janitor. I wiped your floors while you wiped your ledgers. The difference between us wasn't intelligence. It was opportunity. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just change my life. It changed the way I saw myself. Never underestimate the invisible people. We see more than you think. The room erupted in applause. Ruth smiled, not for their validation, but for the girl she once was, the girl who sat alone at midnight with nothing but unpaid bills and stubborn hope. That girl had finally been seen. Legacy today, Ruth's consulting firm operates nationwide. Hundreds of women have passed through her mentorship program, many of them now accountants, auditors, and entrepreneurs themselves. Her son Daniel is studying law, determined to specialize in corporate ethics, inspired by the battles his mother once fought. Ruth doesn't call herself a hero. She calls herself a survivor, a teacher, a mother. But when people introduce her at events, they often call her something else, a beacon, and maybe that's what she became. Not just for her family, not just for her clients, but for anyone who ever thought their story had ended too soon. Because Ruth proved that stories don't end when dreams are buried. They end when courage refuses to stay silent. And hers, it was. Never about the mop. It was always about the plan. Thanks for watching, story lovers. If Ruth's journey inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful true-life stories every week. And tell us in the comments, what did this story teach you about resilience? They once called her just a cleaner, but maybe they never realized. Ruth had been cleaning up messes long before anyone noticed. Financial ones, emotional ones, the broken pieces of a life that others walked away from. She didn't chase applause. She wasn't interested in the spotlight. All she ever wanted was peace, dignity, a chance to breathe without someone else's weight on her back. And now, she has it. But the story doesn't end with her peace. It continues in the lives she touched, those young women in community centers who once thought they weren't good enough. The single mothers she mentored who now run their own businesses, the corporations that think twice before adjusting their numbers because they know someone like Ruth might be watching. Here's the twist. Last year, Ruth was honored with a National Ethics Award, one usually reserved for high-powered executives and government officials. She accepted it humbly, standing on stage in her modest black dress. And when the cameras flashed, she didn't talk about herself. She talked about the invisible people, the ones pushing brooms, balancing multiple jobs, holding families together, on sheer willpower. She ended her speech with one simple line: "Don't mistake quiet for powerless." And the room went silent, because everyone knew she was right. So what do we learn from Ruth's story? That perseverance isn't loud. That courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers through tired hands that keep going anyway. That dignity is not given. It's claimed. And maybe most importantly, the people we overlook often hold the strongest stories. So the next time you see someone invisible, remember Ruth. Because the mop doesn't define them. Their dreams do. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who saves it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.